Very good. I think we are back from exec session. We are our regular voting meeting for the Board of Education for the City School District is open for business, and I don't believe we have a modification to the agenda. I do see several.
Rob, actually,
go ahead.
My apologies. We do have a modification to the agenda, one that was added earlier today, but I want to follow proper protocols. I move, and I'm sorry that my agenda is not loading here for me.
Sean, there is a supplemental to the personnel report. Is that what you're alluding to?
No, unfortunately, if you give me 1 second, it's agenda item.
Oh, that's right. It was the number of the policy that we're going to discuss later.
That's correct. So I want to make sure that we officially recognize the addition of agenda item 11.3, a discussion about policy 1230, public participation at school board meetings. And so I move that we add that to the agenda.
Second.
Second by Pat, and we will vote on that, correct, Sean? It is necessary to do that.
Yep.
Can't do it by consent. Tricia, call the roll, please.
Okay. Rob Ainsley?
Yes.
Erin Croyle?
Yes.
Sean Eversley Bradwell?
Yes.
Eldred Harris?
Yes.
Nicole Lefebvre?
Yes.
Moira Lang?
Yes.
Chris Malcolm?
Yes.
Ann Reichlin?
Yes.
Patricia Wazalu?
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. And Sean, when we get to policies, you're going to keep track of that. So nothing is missed. So that's appreciated. Very good. So moving on, and I think, where are we? It's public comment period. And I believe we do have some folks signed up for public comment.
Yes, and just before we begin, Tricia and Emily will be handling this part of the public comments for the agenda. Want to acknowledge that later on in tonight's agenda, we'll be speaking about 2 board policies. One is policy 1230, public participation at board meetings. The other is policy 1400, public comments and complaints. And for tonight's meeting, in keeping with our current policy 1230, it is asked that all folks who speak share their name and topic to be addressed as they speak. And we will proceed from there. So Emily and Tricia.
Thank you, Sean. The first person up to speak is Ms. Karina Lockenhoff. Ms. Lockenhoff, you are unmuted.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. First, I would like to thank the district for promoting pro-equity and anti-racist curricula, such as the Black Lives Matter at School program. Recent events in the Dryden School District have yet again demonstrated how much we need such programs. So thank you so much. I'm so glad this is going well in our district. Second, I would like to raise ongoing concerns about the lack of equity between distance and in-person learners at the elementary level. Last October, I presented a petition that was signed by over 300 district parents. The petition called out severe inequities between distance and in-person learners. These inequities were created by the district's choice to open on a 5-day in-person schedule at all costs. This meant that the bulk of resources went to in-person students, leaving distance learners in large classes, often over 30 students. The petition asked for smaller online class sizes and added support to ensure that distance learning students had a learning experience comparable to in-person learners. Sadly, those requests have not been met. Moreover, the district did not live up to its promise to allow families to reassess their learning choice at the end of fall semester. Although some students were allowed back in person, others are still waiting for a spot and are paying a heavy toll. Online class sizes continue to be very large, and what's more concerning is that distance learners are missing out on core skills. Throughout spring, my 5th grader had regular handwriting practice in spite of the online setting because she was in a smaller class. But since she was switched to the large online class, she has written less than a page in longhand since October. She's now asked to type her responses, and with the easy access to spell check, her spelling skills have taken a steep hit. She's no longer correcting herself, she's just hitting autocorrect. I've now heard from several district employees that this is not a problem because she'll be able to use spell check in middle and high school, but unfortunately there's a minimum of spelling skills required to use spell check. The other day, she was in tears because she was trying to write basic words like else or these, but she was so far off that she completely stumped the spell check. She was lost. This massive regression in skills is happening to a kid whose parents are university professors and whose house is stuffed with books and education materials. I can't imagine what's happening to distance learners from less privileged backgrounds. What's making things worse is that the district has converted all of its dedicated reading teachers at the elementary level into classroom teachers for in-person students. This limits access to response to intervention programs that would be critical to addressing learning loss in online learners. There are 3 months left in the school year. I'm calling on district leadership to please make a concerted effort to address the learning loss, especially in ELA and in the writing and spelling among the distance learners. Please bring back those reading teachers, bring back additional resources, bring back long handwriting into the online classroom. It's so critical because otherwise those students are going to come back in fall and are going to be lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lockenhoff. Up next, we have Yael Sar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm also very thankful that today we are not in the webinar format. This feels so much better seeing everyone's faces, and I'm also grateful that the public comments come with our video on. It feels so much more humanized. Thank you, I appreciate that. Today, I am reading an anonymous comment by another
Ms.
district
Sar, I
parent.
apologize for interrupting. Our current policy does not allow for the reading of anonymous letters. We can send anonymous letters to individual board members, to the board clerk, to the Let's Talk portal, but we have asked, according to our current policy 1230, that folks speak on their own behalf.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that in previous meetings when readers were allowed to speak for others, that was in contradiction to board policy?
That was indeed in violation of our current board policy, yes. And that's part of the conversation we'll be having this evening when we discuss policy 1230.
Okay, I sit corrected. Thank you. I'm good. I'm done. Thank you.
And again, I would say that please feel free to submit any anonymous letter to individual board members, to the board clerk, or to the Let's Talk portal. We will still receive the information. Emily or Tricia?
Thank you, Sean. Up next, we have Mr. Steve Manley.
Good evening. Yael had her hand raised just as I came on. I'm not sure if she was fully finished.
Go ahead. Let's finish up with Yael. We're always happy to hear from folks that sign up and wish to speak to the board. And when we're in person, it really is common practice, not only here, but across the state, that you state who you are and what you're going to speak about.
Sure.
We get glad to get letters from anyone. If you want to be anonymous, fine, but it's really as much, we try to be as open as possible for folks speaking to us. Always happy to do that. And we want to hear from you, or we want to hear from you, Yael. And others can certainly send letters to us. So thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very clarifying. So I'm Yael Saar. I am the mother of 2 children in the district. Ari is a 6th grader at Boynton. He is a distant learner. Ari and his brother Adam is a junior at IHS and is also a distant learner, and most of you know him as one of the representatives of the high school reps to the board. So in response to what you guys just told me, which I understand and respect, I have a question about the Let's Talk portal. And over the past few years, and especially since the pandemic began, I know that a great number of parents have written a lot of requests and basically, you know, either made requests or just shared very strong feelings or just a lot of heartfelt communications to the Let's Talk portal. And one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of people who've done that is that they are feeling that it's going nowhere, and that the time and the emotion and energy that they were spending to write their communications then feels like it was depleting because they don't always get a response. And if they haven't saved that information somewhere else, no one but whoever is reading the we don't know exactly who reads the Let's Talk. I'm assuming a lot of board members do, but there's no clear path for those feelings and ideas that parents share with you to be seen by the community. And I believe that that's a loss of parent and constituent energy and agency. So my request is, if it was possible, to add like a click button, like a checkbox to the Let's Talk communications that would ask the communicators if they would like to have their comment be public somewhere on the vast website situation that ICSD holds, somewhere where the community, you know, the tons of emotion and time that parents put into communicating with you guys would then not disappear into cyberspace, but could be something that other parents can see and teachers can see and administrators can see. And that way that energy has a longer reach and impact. And now I'm completely done. And thank you for allowing me to speak again.
No, thank you. It was great to hear you and what you wanted to talk about. That's outstanding. And Steve, go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm all unmuted. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for your time tonight, your dedication to our schools. My name is Steve Manley. I am the Executive Director of IPEI, the Ithaca Public Education Initiative. I'm honored in this role to share in 25 years, meeting the needs of teachers, schools, students, supporting their risk-taking and their innovation throughout our school district. This year, we are funding, among other things, classrooms diversifying the authors in their classroom libraries, students becoming scientists in their classroom and at a distance, the revision of the 10th grade literature curriculum at Ithaca High School, broadening the scope of authors, introducing and embedding BI/POC literature while challenging 10th grade students to have grade-wide conversations, and experiences. We are able to fund these ideas and turn them into reality through the gifts made from our community to IPEI. We then make those gifts available to the Ithaca City School District, to its schools, to its teachers, to its students. We're honored to provide this support. Our annual fundraising event, the Adult Spelling Bee, and generous support from individuals, businesses, and organizations throughout the year make this work possible. And like so many things, COVID has required us to pause the bee this year, but we still need your support. And Mr. Ainsley, members of the board, Dr. Brown, all the individuals listening tonight, I am inviting you all to register and join us in the IPEI scavenger hunt. Sponsored by Cayuga Medical Center, Tompkins Trust Company, Warren Real Estate, and Cornell University, with many other local location sponsors. The scavenger hunt is a family and pod-friendly, socially distanced exploration of downtown and just a little bit beyond Ithaca, interpreting clues, discovering sites of history and culture that have shaped the city we call home. Registration for this fundraiser event is open now at ipei.org with individual, family, and pod prices, as well as a pay what you can option. We want everyone to feel that they can participate in this outdoor, socially distant, safe at your own pace and comfort level event. I hope we'll see you the weekend of April 17th and 18th outside of the house with your mask on and on the IPEI scavenger hunt. All information is available at ipei.org. Mr. Ainsley, members of the board, thank you for your time. I'm honored to work with your teachers and your staff to help make great things possible for our students and our schools.
Thank you, Steve.
Up next is Florenzia Arden. I don't see Florenzia in the chat, so I'm going to move on to Suzanne Vandermark.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Vandermark, and I'm speaking today about concurrent learning. I'm a special education teacher here at Ithaca High School, and I'm also a parent of a sophomore here. I'd like to thank the central leadership team in the Board of Education for the support and leadership that you've provided, especially through these last 12 months. I have no idea what sorts of things you've had to do to keep things going here, but I want to say thank you, and I want to thank you for letting me speak tonight. I wanted to take some time to show and explain what I do as an in-person special education teacher, so that moving forward with planning for the next academic year, you can all have a picture of the challenges all teachers face. I am what's called a direct consultant teacher for 3 Global I classes and 2 economics classes. I am legally required to be in these classes to directly provide special design instruction so that students with disabilities can access their education alongside their non-disabled peers. I'm speaking to you from the room where I teach every school day, and I'm speaking with a mask as I do every school day. As I said, I teach concurrently, which means that I teach the in-person students who sit in these desks behind me, and also the remote students who are projected on this Epson board, much like this Zoom meeting is being projected right now. The general education teachers that I work with teach remotely, so they're projected from the Epson board as well. Usually the only face that I see is of the general education teacher because most students don't turn on their cameras. And in fact, some students I haven't seen all year. The in-person students can talk to the remote students through this snowball mic. Sometimes it's hard to hear, but that's what we use. And also, when we have to break out into smaller groups and I can work more focused with my certain students, I usually go to another computer, which is right here. This is a laptop, a borrowed laptop from the library. And I find these headphones work best, so I can work with students closely who are remote. So while I'm doing that, I'm also checking in with students in the classroom, both the general ed and special ed students that are in the classroom as well. So I wanted you to see that, like many teachers, I'm kind of part an in-class facilitator, part special ed teacher, part mediocre tech problem solver. And I feel like my skills are spread thin. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand the challenges and limitations of teaching concurrently. I can only imagine what it feels like from a student's point of view. I don't think it's worth it to pour more resources into this model because I don't think that it would provide much added benefit. Rather, I think our resources would be best spent designing a setup that allows for classes to be either 100% in-person teaching or 100% remote learning. Many New York districts are implementing online learning academies through their BOCES, and I can post an example of that in the chat. I do think that the solution will probably start with a committee composed of staff experienced in creating master schedules. That's a difficult task to do, even in a normal year. And also people from our central administration with the power and knowledge to create this rather quick change. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge, and I'm wrapping up here. I challenge you all for our board, for the next board meeting, to conduct it using the concurrent model. Maybe you all could group in the boardroom, some at home, some community members in the boardroom, community members at home. And I think you would feel firsthand that of the three modes of instruction, meaning all in person, all remote, or this concurrent system, that the concurrent system, although better than no education at all, is the worst model for our secondary students. So it's March and time is on our side right now to plan for this. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Up next is Miss Liza Maron.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So my name is Lisa Maron. I am a parent of two ICSD students. And the topic, well, I was also signed up to make an anonymous comment, to read an anonymous comment. But rather than just skipping my spot, I wanted to make sure to go on record so that everyone on the board and everyone listening today realizes that there are multiple people who would like their voices heard, but that don't feel comfortable speaking up, and maybe just take a moment to think about why that might be. And that the idea of just telling these people to submit their comments through the Let's Talk portal, it really isn't the same. There are 92 participants at this meeting today. It will be recorded. The recording will be shared with the public. So when you make a comment here, you're sharing it with the board and also sharing it with the community. So the community can know what others are thinking and we can build from each other and move forward. Whereas if you're just writing to the Let's Talk portal, only people in the administration are getting to read it. And we may or may not get a response, as Yael commented. So I think this model has room for improvement, and I'm disappointed that I cannot share my comment today, but I wanted to make sure that we reflected on that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Up next, we have Mr. Tim Harris.
Hi, my name is Tim Harris. I'm a pediatrician at Northeast Pediatrics here in town. I'm also the parent of two children in the school district, one in elementary school who gets to come to school in person every day, and one who's doing the hybrid, so 2 days in person at DeWitt Middle School. I just wanted to share briefly some of my experiences in the office interacting with lots of children and families throughout this pandemic. At the outset of all of this, I was most concerned with the smaller number of at-risk children, children with developmental disabilities, other learning disabilities, ADHD, and how distance learning was going to affect their ability to learn during the school year. But what struck me the most is how broad the struggles have been throughout the student population. So when I have kids in the office, and of course this is anecdotal, but I ask all the children who are learning through the hybrid model or at home, but especially the hybrid model, which they prefer, being at home learning or being in-person learning. And it has been universal. I've seen just a couple of children who have said that they prefer learning from home, and pretty much everybody else is pretty clear that they feel like they're missing out. So my concern has switched to the problems, not the major issues that we are certainly seeing a spike of mental health issues and so on, but the kind of subacute problems of kids who just are learning less than they typically do. They're getting less social interaction than they would in a typical school year. And as a result, such a large number of children are struggling. So I just wanted to offer my services to anybody in the school board that would like to have an offline conversation about the challenges of getting more days in school for the students, because I continue to be concerned about all of the challenges that these students are facing from not being able to be in school 5 days a week. Thanks, that's it.
Thanks, Dr. Harris, appreciate it.
Oh, and I should point out that if anybody wants to get in touch with me, Dr. Dadali will have my contact information. Sorry.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Miss Jessica Casey.
Hi there. I'm Jessica Casey, and I'm a pediatrician at Buttermilk Falls Pediatrics. I just want to follow on to what Tim said. And I agree with everything he said, and for all the same reasons. The other thing I see a lot of in my practice is adolescent mental health. It's a lot of what I've done for years. And the magnitude of this and how much kids are struggling, kids that have not struggled in the past, kids who've maybe struggled a little, it's really just overwhelming. It's not developmentally appropriate for adolescents to not be seeing each other. And so it's sort of accumulated over the last year to a degree that I don't know what to do for them at this point. They need to see each other. They need to have more time out of the house. I agree that as much as we can get them back into school safely, it would really just be of benefit. I feel like next year there's going to be a whole lot of social emotional kind of trauma that everybody has to work through. And I really appreciate you hearing me say that, because academically that's going to be maybe the easy part of catching up. I have this feeling based on what I'm seeing. So I'm also here and happy to help and have conversations and do what we can to make sure everybody thrives. Thank you. I'll keep it short.
No, thank you, Dr. Casey. Look forward to having more students back in classrooms very, very soon. And Tricia, no, thank you. Tricia?
So Rob, that was, Dr. Casey was the last person on the list tonight.
No, very good, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, Tricia, the list you sent me had Kelly Boyko as the final speaker.
Hi, I was also going to speak on behalf of others who weren't feeling like they could speak on their own. So I had withdrawn myself from speaking today. I don't have anything else specific to say, but there are definitely lots of people who don't feel that they can say who they are. So I was going to do that. I'll forward an email on to Tricia though.
No, thank you. And we'll discuss those policies a little later in the meeting. And then, but I think, Sean, are we good to go ahead and move on so we can get to our agenda?
I believe so.
All right, very good. And so on to student reps.
Hi. It's Emma speaking. You guys hear me? Okay, lovely. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who spoke today in public comment, speaking on behalf of your community and about topics that are important to you or essential to bringing important perspectives to the table. In my time being a board rep, I've seen many people take a stand during public comment section right before our presentation, of course. And their words were well spoken and very eloquently said, and I appreciated their insight and their passion. Directly after public comment, we, the board represents, present our section from our community's perspective. And it came to our attention that by not immediately to responding to public comments, it becomes easy to overlook what points they might bring to the table as more people present their opinions and their topics. While I'm aware some board members take notes and try to address everyone's concerns, which I think is great, we were wondering if in the future it would be easier to respond to public comment and our section individually.
Emma, if that's a question for the board, I think that's a conversation that we have to have later in the meeting during board responses. So I apologize for the irony.
Excuse me, Sean? Dr. Dundale would like to speak, if that's possible.
Sure. Absolutely. Let's hear from Dr. Dundale, and then we can move back on to student reps.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I thought I sent an email. I'm not sure what happened, but thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to read a statement because I have a lot to say. I'm going to try to do it really fast. So if I sound like one of those list of side effects at the end of drug ads, let me know and tell me to slow down, okay? So most of you know me as the ICSD medical director, but I'm also a frontline healthcare worker and a mom to 3 kids in the district. I'm here in all my roles tonight to advocate for the increase in in-person instruction this year. Many of you may remember getting middle of the night emails from me last March when we made the decision to close the schools, when I was waking up worried about the safety of our community. At the time, we knew about the transmission of the virus and COVID rates were rising exponentially around us. When we closed in March, it was the right thing to do. I'm again waking up with a sense of urgency. Although the children have been largely spared the worst implications of COVID, as they typically exhibit milder symptoms and have a better prognosis, the kids are not all right. The pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on the mental health and well-being of our kids. In a recent survey of over 1,200 parents of children aged 5 to 12 conducted by the CDC, children receiving virtual or hybrid instruction were reported to have worsened mental health or emotional health, decreased physical activity, and less time spent outdoors than those receiving in-person instruction. Additionally, the parents of children receiving virtual or hybrid instruction were more likely to report their own emotional distress related to balancing work and childcare. They were also at greater risk on 11 out of 17 indicators of child and parental well-being scores. As for adolescents, a national study looking at the children aged 13 to 18-year-olds found a doubling of insurance claims for mental health issues as compared to the year before. This includes claims for self-harm, which were up by 90%, suicide attempts up by almost 120%, anxiety increased 93%, and major depressive disorder by 83%. I'm seeing similar things in my practice, and so are my colleagues, as you've heard from Dr. Harris and Dr. Casey. What we're also learning is that schools are low-risk settings for COVID transmission. Recent reports from multiple districts across the country illustrate schools' ability to maintain low-risk environments, even with the reduction of physical distancing by using proven mitigation strategies like we're using, like mask wearing, improved ventilation, and hand hygiene. Based on this research, last Friday, the CDC released updated guidance allowing 3 feet rather than 6 feet of distance between students. This shift puts school districts in a position to mitigate some of these negative effects of this pandemic for children in our community by bringing more students back to the classroom. Not only can we bring more students back to in school, but I think we could do it without jeopardizing the health and safety of our educators, thanks in large part to vaccines. We're lucky to live in a community that has prioritized our schools, pushing our staff ahead of all the other frontline workers. And from what I hear, everyone who wanted to be vaccinated has received at least their first dose. All of this is to say that we can and should bring students back for in-person instruction this year. Schools are not just a place to provide education. We all know that they provide so much more than that. Bringing more students back into the classroom will benefit the children directly, affording them greater access to academic, social, and emotional support and other services. The benefit of in-person instructors are likely to extend to their caregivers in our broader school community, particularly those shouldering long-standing inequities which this pandemic has exposed and exacerbated. I am so grateful to be a member of this community, and I feel privileged that I see what you all do, you, the teachers, administration, and the Board of Ed behind the scenes, and I know you're dedicated so much to our students. I am here and committed to supporting your efforts for the students to return to in-person learning as my capacity as ICSD's medical director and in any capacity you need me. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor. And now back to student.
Hi. So another question we have is, if I guess this is also kind of piggybacking on what a lot of the people in the public comments were saying, but if someone wanted to submit a public comment anonymously, how will the rest of the community know that their concerns are being addressed and being heard and that the board is taking action on them? As well as the fact that we know that many teachers and other stakeholders in the district prefer to present anonymously because of concerns of possible retribution for criticizing the district or raising concerns. And we would like to know how you plan on addressing and alleviating these concerns as to making presenting publicly and not anonymously comfortable and safe for everyone in the community.
As was mentioned in the public comments also, there's a lot of people who would like to see a return to in-person learning. And yeah, so I guess I really just wanted to know how realistic that is. Can we expect a full return in person? Can we expect partial? And what kind of standards or vaccination numbers would we need to allow that? Also, I know that Biden had stated earlier this month that all adults could be vaccinated by the end of May. And if we assume that's true, I was wondering what kind of environment we could expect to come next September, because I don't doubt that COVID will continue to exist. But so I was really wondering about the district's plans for issues like childcare for teachers that seem to be happening now. Yeah, and I understand that a lot of these questions are still unknown, but I feel they aren't that unlikely. So I feel I was just wondering what kind of plans the district has for these very possible situations.
I would also like to bring up the topic of bringing awareness to Asian American hate, violence, and racism. As you probably know, last week there was a mass shooting in Atlanta, Georgia, most likely targeted against the Asian American community. Even before this horrifying event, there has been a huge rise of anti-AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander violence, hate, and racism that has been exacerbated by COVID and other long-held negative views from the public. Some IHS students of the AAPI community have directly experienced this type of hate, like being spit on and bullied, and they are scared. It has uncovered many microaggressions rooted in systematic racism and other feelings of being labeled as foreigners and being subjects of the harmful model minority myth, as well as being seen as a monolith, when in fact Asians are a very diverse group. Seemingly harmless microaggressions can be harmful to our identity and damage the way we perceive ourselves. We grew up believing that we needed to be okay with these types of normalized racism, and that's not okay. I understand that IHS is taking steps to educate teachers and staff and support students about this important topic, but I was wondering what the district is doing to include Asian Americans and other people of color in anti-racist education and policies. We would like to emphasize that BIPOC includes Asians and other ethnic minority groups. It is very common for people to, without realizing, use the term BIPOC in a way that is exclusionary of Asian Americans and other minority groups. So we feel it is important for AAPI and all racial minority groups to be involved and included in anti-racism discussions and initiatives considering BIPOC. In the chat, I have also sent a video from Evelyn Kim, a senior at IHS, where she talks about her own experience being Asian American and some ways to stop Asian hate. I think this is a very powerful video, so I encourage everyone here to watch it.
Anything else right now? And we'll just go to board responses, those who wish to respond right now.
I'll start. I'm going to try and address the issues raised somewhat chronologically, though grouping together comments that were on similar topics. So starting with the comment about communication with the board, and specifically people wanting to communicate anonymously. So one thing I can say about the fact that we did not follow our own policy for public comment for a number of meetings, I think I attribute it to a lot of what has happened since we've switched to this remote meeting, the Zoom meetings, is that we're doing a lot of things sort of on the fly. So we let things happen without actually realizing that we were not following our own policy. So when anonymous comments became pretty prominent, we realized that in some ways we might see it as problematic. And certainly it was problematic in that it does not follow our policy. So that's why we're going to be discussing this further tonight about do we want to modify our policy? And also, though, I really appreciate people bringing up the limitations of the other avenues for communication, like the Let's Talk portal. So I think that certainly moving forward, maybe tonight, but certainly moving forward, I think we're going to have further conversation about how we can make sure that the community has multiple avenues in order to share their perceptions and to also feel like they're being heard by those of us on the board and people in the administration, and that they're also being heard by the larger community. So those are things we're definitely going to be talking about and trying to refine. So I guess there's a lot of discussion about the need for getting our students back into the classroom as much as possible full time. And I don't think there's a person on the board, in the administration, or anywhere here who doesn't think it's important to bring students back full time. There are a lot of barriers to doing that. And one of them, and Dr. Brown's talked about this often, is that we have to operate under certain guidelines. The guidelines change. Sometimes we hear information that sounds like the guidelines are going to change, but we're not sure. But we're trying, and our administrative team is working tirelessly to plan for potential changes to the situation with the vaccine, the situation with the spread of COVID, and what we're being told about what are the guidelines we have to follow. So this is something that is being discussed and planned for, and certainly for next year, we are hoping to have every student who wants to be back in our buildings full time. We realize that it is essential. And I really thank Suzanne for demonstrating so clearly, explaining so clearly what the model that she is, the concurrent model that teachers in secondary are operating under, and particularly the teachers who are in person, who have to deal with not only students who are in person, but students who are online, in some cases, co-teachers who are online while they're in person. So I'm pretty aware of that because I have a daughter who is a secondary teacher who is doing exactly that. And I hear and see from her what the incredible challenges are. And also as a member of the curriculum committee, we have observed classes that are operating in this concurrent model. Nobody thinks it's good. So we are all trying very, very hard to figure out how we can move away from that. But some of the decisions that were made, months and months ago, were based on what we knew then, what we were able to do then, and we have to continually reassess how conditions are changed and what we have learned about what works, what doesn't, what works better than things that don't work well at all. So just know that this is something that all of us care deeply about. And I guess to respond to, and I think that sort of addresses, in our admin team, we'll talk more to some of the questions that Andrew was asking about the specific plans for next year. And then to Grace's comment about the rise in anti-Asian violence and discrimination, we're, I think, all of us quite aware that it has been rising, and it's really accelerating, and it's most disturbing. The district has charged every teacher, every staff member to be working from an anti-racist perspective and to implement anti-racist curriculum and practices. That's everybody's responsibility. And everybody is engaged in learning more about how to do that. And I think Grace's point is absolutely well taken, that many times it is not recognized that Asian Americans are also targets, and increasingly targets, of racist action. And so for us all to be reminded of that, and for our staff to have that awareness as they continue their efforts to make us an actively anti-racist school district and community, I think it's really important that we are reminded of that. So thanks to everybody who commented. I may have missed some things, but I'm sure my fellow board members will have more to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Moira. You covered a lot, and I appreciate it. Well said. Others wish to speak?
I would like to add my comments to Moira's. Again, I will try to group comments. As Moira said, we are all aware of the limitations of concurrent learning. And and teaching. And of course, this was unknown territory when we tried to do, the district tried to do the best it could, because one of the realities about many people making heartfelt comments is I don't think there's any two people in this district who want exactly the same thing, and everyone has the answer to what they want. My husband is teaching at Ithaca College. He taught for 30+ years in person. Last year he taught online, and now he is doing blended in class, talking to kids who are in his class and talking to kids who are as many as 1,000 miles away at home on a computer. And so he's done it all. And when he comes home every day after doing the concurrent learning, he is exhausted in a way that I've never seen him. It's hard. And what he says keeps him going is the emotional need of people to connect, for teachers and students to connect in person. And we can talk about what's best and hardest and most effective, but you can't take that emotional component out. And the teachers I've talked to who are teaching at the high school, it's hard, and they don't want to do it anymore, and they don't know how they're going to get through the year, but they say, it's the kids in my classroom who keep me going. And they mean it. And that's why, I'm sorry, that's why they're teachers. None of us asked for this. None of you asked for this. And I appreciate all the doctors who came on worried about the mental health of children. I worry about that on a daily basis. I've seen it play out with neighbors and family. A shout out to Dr. Jessica Casey, who was my daughter's pediatrician and a wonderful one. This is very real, and it's the emotional needs that schools meet that we need to do more. And I want to tie in all the concerns that our student reps have had, especially Grace's comments about anti-Asian racism. The last 4 years politically in this country were a horror for me. We need to do more. It's very real, and it's incredibly serious. And I'm going to tie this in with people increasingly wanting to make anonymous comments and talking about how they have to make anonymous comments because they're afraid to speak out. I'm so old that I still get the Ithaca Journal, and some of you may still look at paper newspapers. I know the IHS Tatler is one of the greatest student newspapers around. When online comments started coming into vogue with newspapers, the Ithaca Journal ran online comments, and within less than a year, they disabled the online comments function because people could set up anonymous accounts and would say the nastiest, most hateful, most racist things that I ever saw coming out of this community on the cover of not having to identify themselves. And not all of the anonymous comments were like that, but a number of anonymous comments were gratuitously nasty personal comments against people who are serving this public. And I was very concerned about that. When I speak publicly, I expect to be held accountable for what I say, and I have been held accountable for what I say, and that's right. And I have to think about what I say and who it might hurt and how it will be taken. And I'm not perfect at it. I've made mistakes. I try to apologize when I do that. Anonymous comments, in my opinion, and it's a personal opinion, circumvent that in a way that is not ultimately healthy for this community. And we will talk about this in policy. We'll talk about that later. I will cede my time to other people.
I'll just a couple things. First, I just want to say to Steve Manley of IPEI, thank you for everything that IPEI does for the district in supporting our programs and in kind of spurring a lot of innovation. And I think the scavenger hunt sounds really fun. So I plan to do it. So that is really great. So the other thing is that a lot of things have already been spoken, so I'm not going to say them again. But I do want to just say one thing in relationship to the Let's Talk portal and the best ways to communicate with the board. I think that's a really good point. And I think it would bear kind of further discussion in terms of how the comments go through the Let's Talk portal and what we do with them after they come and what kind of responses. And so thanks for bringing that up. And the other thing I just want to say in terms of the concurrent teaching model, it's a really tough one. And I realized this, I think it's almost exactly a year ago to this week that the district went to remote, that the pandemic and everything shut down. So it's just it's been a really long haul. So I think people have just done an amazing job under a lot of pressure. And I hope we can figure out some way to make the concurrent teaching work better. For teachers and for students and for families, because yeah, as the demonstration showed, it is really complicated to try to do all these things, and it's like standing our head and juggling and all at the same time. So thanks everybody for all your comments.
I'm going to break with what I told myself was I was not going to speak during board responses, but I am going to speak during board responses. And of course, I feel compelled, and I've been doing it in my own classes, and we may put out a statement as a district to acknowledge what Grace reminded us of the heart-wrenching, devastating events in Georgia, which I define not only as racist, but as gendered. It was an example of violent racism and violent patriarchy. And we know that we don't have to look to Georgia. We can look in our own community and find the same rise of AAPI hate crimes taking place in Ithaca. And so it requires us to stand with our brethren and sistren and kinfolk, and it requires us to take some significant action, both as a school district and as a community. And we should spend some time to give our thoughts and prayers for those of us who pray to the families and to the community, both here and there. Equally impacted today, because I have family in Boulder, so I'm watching a nation do a number of tragic events. So feel compelled. Grace, I want to thank you for the courage and for reminding us to make sure that we ground our work in what's extremely important. Hold on, I'm not done, Elder. It's going to take me 2 other points, and then I apologize.
You leave a gap. I'm jumping in, bro. I thought you knew that by now.
I'm leaving a gap to take a breath and make sure I can hold in my emotions as much as possible. To Emma's question, unfortunately, we've acknowledged this. Board meetings do not promote dialogue. Our current board agenda structure is guided by policy 2350. As someone who has a doctorate in policy analysis, I'm aware that policies, when done right, can be liberating and can often be oppressive. And so it requires us to do some review of the ways in which our policies are oppressive and when do we do something different with them. And as we had a conversation with the board reps, that was one of the questions I was asking, should we have a dialogue about policy 2350? And that's another question that we'll raise both in the policy committee and amongst the board as a whole. Adam's questions, that will be part of our discussion, Adam, when we talk about policy 1230. And I will make mention that both of those policies were passed in 2013. And both of those policies were passed at the recommendation of our statewide organization, which is the New York State School Board Association, which gave us recommendations for a majority of our policies, all of which we reviewed and rewritten, but doesn't mean that almost 10 years later, they don't need to be rewritten as well. So for those who have the fortitude and the patience and the energy, please stick around and we'll have more of that conversation later on this evening. And then lastly, connected to what I was saying earlier, I am worried about teacher burnout, and I'm worried about burnout in every field, every profession, every job. Everyone I talk to, doesn't matter what their profession is fraying. And so there's no doubt that impacts teachers, students. I'm in constant dialogue with my students and trying to take care of their mental well-being. And they're in constant conversation with me, trying to take care of my mental well-being. So Suzanne talking about the idea of doing a high flex model. I have the privilege of following Dr. Wazaloo right after his class. His class gets done, I'm in the same room right afterwards. And I said to a number of my board colleagues, as a 25-year veteran educator, if I am asked to do a hybrid or high flex model next school year, I may leave the profession. And I think I'm a decent teacher, but what we're being asked to do and what we've been asked to do is extremely difficult. I also understand that no one's asked for this. I'm aware that this is not something that we have chosen to do, but I have great compassion that I know when I come home every day from teaching, that I am physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. And that's before I start thinking about what's taking place in the world, what's taking place both at home and various other states and globally in other countries. So I ask for our community. One of the things that I know that we need to do is build community. We continue to have conversations about how to do that as a board, to have different types of sessions that actually allow for engagement and interaction. We'll continue to talk about those, and hopefully we keep working towards building community even through significant disagreements. So thank you for your time.
As usual, I'm always glad to let Sean fully express himself. He does it very well. And I think one of the young students said that we do take notes. And I have done that in the past as well, but I think I'm going to dispense with that technique because that would take a very long time for all of us to respond to everything. And there are always things that you all say that resonate with us more than others, given where we are in our own experiences and emotional states. So tonight, I'm only going to respond to two things in the interest of time and my soul energy. The first is this idea of retribution for folks who would come out and talk to this board. I cannot tell you how offensive I find that. As a marginalized person who had to find my own voice over many years, speak truth to power, throw Molotov cocktails over the castle wall of previous administrations, I understand the instinct. I need you all to understand our expectation is that you overcome that. We don't get the opportunity to hide behind anonymity, neither should our public. At least not for the reasons expressed. I understand and offer my empathy and sympathy to folks who are non-cognitively conformative, folks with speaking issues, folks who may just have a phobia of some kind of public speaking. And tonight, I have some thoughts about what we may do about that if you care to stick around for that policy section. But I'm used to make my position clear. The fear of folks in this community who pay taxes, fear of folks in this community who may have tenure, who are in the union, I can't process that. And if you ever want a response, you better believe that nobody on this board is going to respond to anything anonymous. If you go back in the past, you'll see a pattern. We respond to the people who have articulated their position and have identified who they are, where they're coming from in this community. My second point is to Grace. Grace, I just crafted a long letter to the board and to our administrators, asking us to give proof positive that we are indeed doing as you suggest and incorporating anti-marginalization and oppression curricula across the broad swath of folks we consider Asian here in the West, right? I think those of us who have traveled know a catchphrase is really not a thing, right? In the eastern part of the world, because the the cultures and the histories and the and how certain cultures rub up against one another because of colonialism and war. It's not as simple as Asian in the East. But I want to see proof of it, because we certainly have touted the proof of anti-marginalization efforts that our fourth graders, right, produced regarding indigenous populations. And I think everybody is clear now that we have many instances of the same for African-American population. We even have a Black Lives Matter week. It would not, I don't know how to say this, but it would be very odd to me if at some point we need to have a week for every marginalized group who's been targeted by the same demographic, right? Especially when it comes to mass murder. That almost breaks my heart to even say. But I want evidence, right? That we are putting the concerns of that that large group of the subgroups in front of our students so they can wrestle with that in the same way we have wrestled with other thoughts. These circumstances are hard. Sean said, I'm getting choked up thinking about it. I just want us all to focus on one fact, that in the vast majority of the cases, we know there's one demographic. It's one single demographic perpetrating these crimes. As much as I want to see Black Lives Matter posters and Stop Asian Hate posters and ban violence against Muslims and stop the misogyny, right? What I really want us all to consider is, what is our platform to just say no to white terrorism? That's a phrase I haven't heard at any of these meetings. I haven't seen any banners in our school district. Can we get white young men to stop articulating their angst and their mental, whatever mental illness they may be suffering, and their hatred? Can we get them to stop perpetrating white terrorism? It's something that I plan to discuss with our administrators, and hopefully you students can be involved as well. This is on my soul. The faster we switch our conversations, no matter what people say in their own cultural groups, no matter how we work across intersectionality, somebody's got to say, stop killing us. That's all I have. Thank you.
I will try not to reiterate what my fellow board members have already touched on. I want to first start off by thanking Steve from IPEI for always supporting our teachers and staff during the school year, and especially during this pandemic and quarantine, being able to pivot and find creative ways to engage and inspire our students in our district. To Karina, I feel like you've come to every single board meeting. We hear you loud and clear, as we do our other parents, in terms of online learning not being equitable, your children and children in general, not getting what they need or deserve. And I would say, I feel that's happening in person as well. And when you're on the other side, I think it's easy to think that things are great on the other side, having children that are doing both. I would say that the current model just isn't working. Students aren't getting what they need. Teachers aren't getting the support they need because the support and the needs are changing. Burnout is real. As Dr. Eversley-Bradwell mentioned, most of us are burnt out. We're all working over capacity, whether it's me, this is my 10th Zoom meeting of the day, or teachers, as Suzanne showed us a typical day in her classroom. It's not working. I don't think it's supposed to be working because we are swimming in chaos. So just asking for grace as we continue to work through everything and find a way where everyone is feeling like they're being heard. I don't think everyone is going to get what they want, but we definitely want to continue to strive to give every student and every staff member what they need. I totally hear folks that are talking about the Let's Talk portal. I'll speak for myself and say that I have personally not seen anything or been forwarded anything from the Let's Talk portal. But in terms of emails that are being sent to the board, I will say that we have conversations about almost every single email. So that definitely, in my opinion, has been an effective form of communication. I personally feel indifferent about the reading anonymous letters. I disagree strongly with Eldred in terms of fears of retribution and retaliation. That is real, especially if you are untenured. I don't think that I get to question what if someone feels fear or not, especially if job security is on your mind. I will say that I think that is where union leadership and union representation comes in, whether we're talking about the district or in general. Unions exist to represent their constituents and their people. So I would definitely say while we work through reading anonymous letters, that I would encourage our staff to speak to their union leadership if they feel like they're not getting what they need and they're not being supported. To Suzanne, thank you for sharing a typical day in your classroom. That looks very hard. And I have all the compassion and empathy in terms of all the things that go into your workday and supporting kids that have very different needs, and having to look all around the classroom in terms of where you're hearing voices, who's yelling out. It's hard. To the doctors that showed up, shout out to Dr. Casey. She's all three of my kids' pediatricians. So thank you for showing up. I want to thank you all for speaking about the impacts of the lack of socialization on kids. We've spent a lot of time talking about academics and students falling behind or not getting their academic needs. I think socialization is a huge part of development, especially if we're thinking about our elementary students, if we're talking about our middle school students and high school students, thinking about going through puberty and all of the changes and being stuck in a room, it's not healthy. So thank you for mentioning that. To Emma, I completely agree that I think that we as a board need to have conversations around separating or segmenting public comment and hearing from our reps. Definitely in these times where folks are coming to board meetings very emotionally charged, emotionally drained, it definitely puts a damper on hearing from our student reps, especially if they have something exciting to share and our student reps are following that. I know me personally, my head is in a totally different space after I've heard from 10 to 20 folks, and then student reps come on, and then we're all scrambling to be able to respond to everyone, and people are getting lost in the fray. I will also continue to say, as Dr. Eversley-Bradwell has said many times, that board meetings historically have not been built to have this dialogue. I think it's also important to acknowledge that in the past, our board meetings, in my 5-year tenure, we have not consistently had so many people show up and speak during public comment. And because times are changing as well as our board representation, again, I find you all to be the most engaged, bringing lots of perspective, taking a lot of initiative. I think that as a board, we have to have a conversation around the different climate that we're in, and if the board meetings are serving the purposes or the needs of our students, as well as staff and parents. And Grace, I think you brought up an incredibly important point in terms of AAPI folks being left out of BIPOC language. As someone who has studied DEI work for a while, I find it to be very complex as well in terms of like some Asian folks don't consider themselves people of color. And that is not to negate that they should be part of that, but in terms of how people are processing things and understand things and where they are on their personal journey, I think as a district, we have to continue to have that conversation and to educate ourselves as well as provide spaces for our students to be able to process these different things. I think it's also important for us to make sure that we're creating a safe space for all of our students, especially our BIPOC students. So again, Grace, thank you for bringing that to our attention. And that's all I have from my notes.
Thanks, Nicole, as always. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like,
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm going to try to be concise, and I'd like to start with Grace and really thank you for what you shared. And I just hope that the folks who are on this call understand, you know, what she conveyed with the feeling of not being safe, the mounting aggressions that, you know, Asian Americans and Asian folks face within this country. It's extremely concerning, and we all have a role to play in this. And we need to take a step back and understand what that looks like and what it means for her to be able to speak and verbalize that. And thank you for sharing the link. As soon as we get off this meeting, I intend to jump and look at that. To Emma, I don't want to go into the weeds on this, but I do think, and I agree with Nicole, we need to break these things out so we can compartmentalize them and respond to the student reps and also the public comments. To speak to the Let's Talk the chat, I know that we actually respond to everything that's put in the Let's Talk comments because we get reminders if they're not followed up to in a certain amount of days. I think if we want to be able to respond and answer and acknowledge any concerns or comments, there's a different, maybe we can discuss what's that mechanism looks like, or how do we navigate that? I'm not sure. I heard a few different things in regards to people being able to communicate, people being able to see the public to be able to see their comments. So I guess let's have that dialogue and that conversation. And we did share that, you know, this is not the best vehicle to go back and forth, but how do we address the concerns and be able to react? You know, one of the things I think this district prides itself on is responding and reacting to emails, to notifications, to different things. To Susan, thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into your world. I have kids, I love kids. I don't teach kids for the reason you stated. It is a task, and my heart goes out to you. And, you know, I think we also got a glimpse into what is going on and what the reality is. We heard from so many physicians that are sharing the need for these kids. I heard a heartbreaking story over the weekend about, you know, children at risk and the mounting pressures that they're facing while during this pandemic. How do we move this forward and serve the needs for all people, from our teachers to these children, you know, to all of our ICSD staff, and make this happen? And, you know, it's daunting. So I think I concisely covered everyone. I apologize if I left anyone out, and that's all I've got.
Chris, can I just add about the Let's Talk portal? I think Yael said this directly, and at least one other person that said it this evening, that the idea would be for all of those conversations, all of those posts to be made public, I suppose, if the author agreed, right? That was a checkbox idea. The public should know how many of those posts that are received in that portal are deeply personal and things that the person and we would never share, one, and how many are flat out abusive and what's the word, deeper than racist. I'm shocked that people in our community have the courage to write some of those things, which again, we would never share with the public. That's why the board gets paid the big bucks, as in zero, and why our staff get paid the large bucks to have the emotional maturity to process that and continue with the work. So even that is not as cut and dry as it may appear on its face. There are no black and white issues that we deal with of any scope. There's a lot of gray, and you can see the work that people are putting in to try and resolve that gray to the best effect for our children. Thanks.
Anyone else wish to speak right now? Thanks to everyone who spoke earlier, and student reps, and obviously the board members responding. If I said that just so we're good. Okay, really need to get on with the rest of our agenda. Grace, do you want to speak?
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? Yeah, so thank you to everyone who acknowledged my point about racism against the AAPI community. It's very appreciated. But again, I would like to reiterate that it's not just what happened in Atlanta and the other violences this year that are affecting our Asian American students, but also microaggressions that are rooted in systematic racism, including Ithaca. Besides sending out a statement and asking teachers to start a conversation in class, because I know that myself and some other students and my friends haven't heard anything about it yet. I was wondering what specific actions the district is doing to back up their statement and to include people of color in their BIPOC anti-racist education. But I appreciate the direction Eldred was going with this.
No, thank you, Grace, once again for speaking out and addressing the board and the administration. And I would leave it to the administration to speak to your last question. And we will get to the administration shortly. If we can just get through the consent agenda, and then we can hear from Dr. Brown and hopefully our two middle school principals who have been waiting to speak to us for several meetings now. So can we move on? Are we good? Go ahead and need a motion on the consent agenda, please.
I move the consent agenda. For consent
Second.
adoption.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Eldred. Are there any questions? Basically, it's been reviewed in finance and HR. Anything else that we need to discuss right now?
Rob, I'd just like to point out one thing about the consent agenda, and I'd like to thank Amanda, Emily, and Angela. If you click on any of the items on the consent agenda, there's been descriptors added to it explaining each and every one of them. Just to clarify, we know that a lot of the items on there could be spoken in finances or, the district financial talk. So they went through and enhanced that. And also Emily did color coordinate the treasurer's report. So if anyone has any questions, or would like us to take a look at anything else, please reach out to myself or Amanda. And we'd love to see how we can improve on this.
No, thanks, Chris, for pointing that out. It is clickable now, so it's a big, huge improvement. So I appreciate it from our business office and you, Chris, for driving that. Anything else? Are we good? Tricia, go ahead and please call the roll.
Rob Ainsley,
Yes.
Erin Croyle,
Yes.
Sean Eversley Bradwell,
Yes.
Eldred Harris,
Yes.
Nicole Lefebvre,
Yes.
Moira Lang,
Yes.
Chris Malcolm,
Yes.
Ann Reichland,
Yes.
Pat Wasloo.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. And Dr. Brown. if we could hear from you.
Oh, yes. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Ainsley. It's good to see everyone. I have much to share, and we really need to get to our middle school folks who have been so patient with us for the last month and a half. So we will be brief. I'll ask Ms. Talcott to help me out here as well. In response to the consent agenda, thank you, Board of Education, for your approval of the consent agenda, which included 2 tenure recommendations. I just want to take a moment, as we do when folks earn tenure, administrators earn tenure here, to celebrate some folks. Lynn Vanderwert is an educator who has earned tenure in our school district. She's our evaluation officer. Congratulations, Lynn. Lynn, for folks who don't know, has been key for us with our equity report card, which is a national model for how to display and analyze and gather data, particularly data focused on our equity initiative. So congratulations, Lynn, for all that you do. In addition to the equity report card work, she is our person. She is a one-person department when it comes to our assessment models and us being compliant with New York State regulations when it comes to testing as well. So thank you and congratulations, Lynn. Zach Lynn is another person who just earned tenure tonight. Folks have heard Zach's name. Zach is our Chief Information Officer, our CIO. And Zach, pre-pandemic, he was key with us rolling out, having the largest deployment of one-to-one devices in New York State. Zach has also been leading our instructional technology coaches when we had those. He's been behind the scenes making sure our ubiquitous wireless infrastructure is working and our bandwidth continues to increase. And all at the same time where we have our technology budget has decreased over the years, not increased. So again, congratulations, Zach. We appreciate you and Lynn. Also quickly, I know the conversation is in our community, a lot of conversation in our community about the those Friday afternoon memos that we've been getting for the last year when something big happens. This last Friday, we heard from, federal government. The CDC guidelines were released that spoke to a transition from 6 feet of distance between young people in school districts. I'm generalizing now to 3 feet. I just wish to say to our community that our team here is working diligently to monitor the ever-shifting guidance, and also in conversations about how to react and to respond to guidance. As of right now, though, the CDC recommendations have not been adopted by our New York State Department of Education, our New York State Department of Health, or our Tompkins County Health Department. And as an organization that adheres to those 3 entities' guidance when it comes to what we do in the midst of this pandemic, we are waiting for word from them. And at the same time, we are engaging in conversations with our collective bargaining units as we think about what it would look like to bring more young people back into our spaces and more often. So 2 conversations about getting more young people back into our spaces in this current academic year, and also what the shifting guidance would mean for our organization. So I need to take a breath, but Lily, if you can jump in here right now, you have some things to share. We want to talk about some planning for next year. We have some thoughts for Grace, and I would love for that to be an agenda item at one of our upcoming board meetings where we talk about how we're incorporating Asian and all of our young people into our approaches to being anti-racist. So Lily, I'm going to take a break. You want to jump in and add a few things before we transition then to our middle school folks who have been so patient with us all.
Thanks, Dr. Brown. Thanks to the board and the community. Wanted to take just a moment to let folks know that, of course, we have begun planning for next year. We're engaging 2 strong committees of folks internally, including students as well. And the first one that I'll talk about, which is Learning Forward ICSD. This is really focusing on the way forward regarding learning. We hear a lot of folks talking about the COVID slide or learning loss throughout our country. We think that those terms are actually quite disrespectful to our students and to our teachers. And instead, we want to take an asset-based approach, right? So we are in the midst of putting together a team, and we're about to start meeting. That's going to be a steering committee. It's going to help us really oversee these 3 big elements of Learning Forward ICSD. The first is students as partners and leaders, and really working with our students to help guide the curriculum process and to de-center dominant narratives. Additionally, we want to give all of our educators ongoing time and space to engage in ongoing identity exploration and identity work, right? Who am I in relationship to what I teach and how I teach, and to education in general. And then the third being anti-racist curriculum for all. So that includes not just skills and intellect, but also helping students understand identity, criticality, and giving them real opportunities for joy. Part of that, of course, means looking at year-to-year learning maps, really changing the ways in which we're teaching particular standards and when, right? And taking the realities of COVID-19 into consideration. And also developing strong, authentic, performance-based assessments. The second committee that we're working with is, again, very, very closely tied with our union leadership and continuing to collaborate with them, which is really around the learning models. So in what ways can we avoid the high flex as much as possible, right? And actually work through the models that we actually want that are going to work for kids and staff throughout our organization.
Thanks, Lily. Dr. Brown, anything else right now?
Yeah, Lily, you want to talk about what we're doing with our curriculum work, what you and Ms. Grove are doing with our curriculum work to address anti-racism and anti-Asian racism that we're experiencing right now?
Absolutely, and Mary Grover, I know, is working tirelessly with the equity team members, and they've been gathering, right? We've sent out resources, of course, and suggestions for folks to engage in throughout their communities. But Mary's doing work, and the team itself is doing a lot of really great work in terms of collecting specific examples and building out specific lessons to support anti-racist education, specifically around our AAPI folks throughout our community. So more, we'd be happy to update at a future board meeting. Great idea.
Thank you, Ms. Talcott. And with that, I wish to transition, Mr. Ainsley, if it's okay with you, to our middle school folks who are eager to share some of their thinking and learning with us all. Ms. Talcott, you want to turn it over to who's on? Yeah, I see Lauren, I see Donna, I see some other folks who are now turning their cameras on.
Wonderful. Well, after it's been a long time coming. We are so happy to welcome our fabulous leaders from both DeWitt and Boynton. We're really honored that they're presenting together. The collaboration between these two schools has been exceptional, and in part it is due to the exceptional staff and leadership at those schools. So I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to introduce themselves and get going.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Wright. I am the principal at Boynton Middle School.
And my name is Carlin Gray, and I am the principal at DeWitt Middle School.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donna Lucy Lender. I'm the associate principal at DeWitt Middle School.
Graff, and I'm the associate principal at Boynton Middle School.
All right, we are excited to be here tonight. We, as Lily shared with you, we're really excited to be able to do this presentation together. We have spent a lot of time collaborating and finding ways to work on things at both middle schools throughout the year. So it seems like a great fit to share out what we've been working on together. So just to start, we wanted to just talk a little bit about our setup for this school year. We've had a number of pretty major changes in terms of how the middle schools are operating for this school year. Right now we have a hybrid schedule for our students. So we have most of our students are attending school 2 days a week in person, and then they attend 3 days virtually. While other students attend completely virtually. So 5 days a week, they're virtual. And that leaves our teachers teaching concurrently. So students who are sometimes in the classroom space, sometimes at home. And as you've heard tonight, it's something that's very challenging, but they have been working very hard to reach the needs of all of our learners. One of the major changes that we put in place to help with this new system is moving to a block schedule. And so over this school year, we've transitioned from about 40-minute classes to now about 60-minute classes. One of the benefits that we've seen with this model is that it has allowed for our teachers to be able to plan multiple activities within one lesson. In previous years, 40 minutes goes by really quickly, but now having that longer time of 60 minutes with that same group of students, they're able to get through more material. They're able to offer students more choices in the types of materials that they are working on. And they've also been able to engage in station rotations, which has been really helpful for the concurrent model. One other thing that we really took away from the spring is that there was a need to have sort of one-on-one time or small group time built into whatever schedule we created. That was a strong need and something that we heard from students and families and also from our teachers. And so we've created a schedule that has a built-in time throughout the day, which we call office hours. And during that time, it allows for teachers to have small group or one-on-one check-in with students to be able to review and go over material that's been taught more in depth. And I'm going to pass it over to Dan, who's going to tell you a little bit more about some specific things that teachers are doing to make office hours work.
All right, thank you, Lauren. So as Lauren just shared, each school has time built into their schedules for students and teachers to connect this year. Office hours has provided an opportunity for teachers to make closer connections with students academically and emotionally. I would like to share just one example about a teacher who took time to schedule 10-minute meetings with each of her students so that they could come together and get to know one another. The students were driving the conversations, and they could bring a friend if they wanted to make it a little more easy to manage the situation. So the conversations could be sharing any information the student wanted to. Some examples were poetry was shared or a musical piece by a student, and the teacher just raved about this experience, something they haven't had the time or been able to do in previous years. And as a result of these meetings, they feel like they know their students better than in previous years. And so much so that in a lesson, they can tailor more examples to fit the interests of students as they're going through. Now, Carlin is going to share about some tools being used to communicate with students.
Actually, I'm going to defer to Donna on that.
Yes. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Carlin. So this has been an extraordinary school year, to say the least. The staff at Boynton and DeWitt have worked together since last summer, trying to come up with creative ways to allow our students to have connections outside of academics. This year, both schools have peer student lunch bunch groups where students have the opportunity to meet with their favorite adult and interact in a socially distant manner. Both schools also have created a wealth of clubs so that students have the opportunity to participate in remote activities beyond the regular school day, and also including the school day. I would like to briefly share with you a combined list of club offerings. Please reach out to your home school for specific club offerings. So this school year, our virtual club offerings are Debate Club, Environmental Club, Queer Book, Volunteer, GSA, Astronito, DJ, and we also have a BIPOC club. We also offer our fine and performing arts opportunities, chorus, orchestra, and band. Both schools have also created family opportunities as well, such as game nights, concerts, and variety shows. Both schools are also encouraging students to unplug and get out and play. These past couple of days have been gorgeous. We realize they are in front of screens all day, and we encourage them to get outside and to get some much needed fresh air and vitamin D, which is also important to their well-being. And now Carlin will share with you about grading.
All right. So I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody in my transition to DeWitt. I want to thank Donna and all the teachers that have graciously welcomed me. Everybody's been working their tails off this year. So thanks again to everybody. So I got to come to DeWitt in the middle of a pandemic, which was very exciting, but it also opened a big door for us in terms of shifting some of our systems that we still had control over. So in terms of systems, we looked at things that worked or didn't work, and then we as a leadership team worked to ask ourselves, what do we want grading and feedback structures at DeWitt to look like, sound like, feel like. And I worked with the leadership team and Donna to adopt grading for equity as our core text for the year. And what we did was adopt a standards-based grading system. And if you've never researched or learned about standards-based grading, there's a lot to know and explain. So I will give you a very brief summary. You can look at a standard linked to a set of assignments here in the example. I'm hoping you all can see that. And we're looking at a 100-point scale. And we're also looking at a scale that is based on a standards-based system with a 1 through 4 system correlating with proficiency levels. 4 being above grade level, beyond grade level, and 3 being on target, on grade level. So if you can see here, we are able to give or address something that has been really critical of critical importance to me as an educator, and it came up a lot in terms of our comments and concerns about equity of access for our students. One of the questions we asked ourselves was, how does traditional grading invite bias and provide misleading information? And then what practices can we institute as a community that are mathematically accurate, value knowledge, not behavior, and support a growth mindset? So as you can see here, a student with a 0 to 100 scale, and of course this is just an example and just includes 5 assignments, so you can make lots of mathematical arguments here. But you can see that a final grade with a 0 to 100 scale, still using a 0 to mark a missing assignment, results in a 51.6, which would be a failing grade in a typical school setup. And then with a standards-based grading system, you can see that the student could still reach a level of proficiency because they've demonstrated proficiency in many of the assignments that have been given, and the assignments that are not given don't necessarily count against them. And this is obviously just an example, and we've worked through many, many conversations with the RTI team, our equity team, and our leadership team to adjust instruction, also address policy and practice, and then also increase places for increasing student vulnerability, which is a really key part of learning. Like, if you cannot be vulnerable and make mistakes, which is so critical, and that allows for a space of safety and learning. And I know that this is a long and complex conversation. I'm happy to come back and share more, but I wanted to share that at DeWitt, we have jumped into this wholeheartedly, and I know that Lauren can share very briefly where they are at Boynton with adopting a standards-based grading system. So Lauren, jump in, and we're happy to answer questions as they come up at the end.
Yeah, so at Boynton, we sort of dipped our toe in the water with standards-based grading in the spring as we made changes to our grading system after we had initially switched to distance learning. We had really great experience with that, and our team was definitely very eager and excited to make the full transition to it. But they really wanted to take some time to learn more about it and to really fully understand what this shift would mean for their teaching practices, and how to properly set that up. So we've spent a lot of this year learning and reading and finding out more from our DeWitt colleagues about how this looks in practice. But we also had a team who was really eager and ready to go, and they just wanted to hit the ground running with giving this sort of pilot a go. So our 7th grade team actually made the transition to standards-based grading, and has been using that since the start of the school year. So our plan moving forward is that in the fall, the rest of the building will make that transition, and then both middle schools will be fully on board with the standard-based grading. In the meantime, we've continued to have conversations about what equitable grading looks like, especially in this pandemic, and what changes and practices can we make changes to right now that are going to benefit our students today. So we've been able to help teachers make some shifts around, policies around late work, around, providing modified work for all students when needed. And those shifts have been really helpful.
Thanks, Lauren. So one more way to look at a grade book is to look at it through a multi-tiered lens of looking at it organized by multiple standards. So that last example was just for some mathematical understanding, and this one you can look at where it might help a teacher adjust practice really quickly based on a particular standard. And that actually will help us significantly with interventions, and also collecting data on how students need additional, how or why students need additional support in content areas. At this point, we're going to shift to our anti-racist work, which is very widespread, but is centered around 2 key ideas. Well, actually 3 key ideas, I would say. One is around a big shift in how many folks, I am tempted to say everyone, can't say everyone, but I know that most of our folks are looking really critically at their curriculum in terms of how to redesign it to teach through a social justice lens. We have many people designing units on identity, which is the core idea of one of the concepts in Goldie Muhammad's work around responsive and historically relevant literacy practices. Our 6th grade team worked on the text Blended, which talks about a blended family and a complex dynamic within that family, but they also use the identity wheel and the identity, sort of the identity as the core of that text to explore their own identity. And we've also talked about stamped the text, and I think Lavelle could answer how this has come to be, but he was part of a kickoff or a celebration, really a joint celebration between the 2 schools, where we celebrated having this text stamped in every one of our middle school kids' hands as a gift. And we can talk about how that happens. We did celebrate Black Lives Matter at school, which also happens to correlate with a 3-day snow apocalypse, which we then just extended into the whole month. And we have then crossed the intersectional line to extend it into women's history and the celebration of women, which we have then jumped into celebrating and understanding and digging into issues, continued issues of marginalization through our home-based curriculum, which is a sequence of lessons that we can design collaboratively with our equity team and our administration. This week we looked at experiences of Asian Americans, and we asked kids to respond to those experiences. And we have continued to rope in student voice. So I'm going to work with a student this week to annotate a video on top of overlay her narrative, a story that she has written about her experience, so that we can share that with our students and talk and dialogue about how students are experiencing life at school and life in the world. And I think that's it. We have lots of sort of models of how concurrent or hybrid instruction works that we could show you, but it's certainly something I could just send to the board later. So we're happy to take questions.
It's Anne. I actually have one question. First of all, thank you for all the kind of innovative work that you've been doing this year under really challenging circumstances. I have a question about the grading system. I really appreciate that you're exploring and revamping it, but I guess I'm still a little bit confused about how it works and how the students were transitioned to it and how the families were introduced to it and whether people, whether students who are accustomed to grading in the one way are adapting to grading this way. So a bunch of different questions. So
well, I'll jump in and then maybe Lauren can add on. So we started this standards-based grading last March when schools closed, and it was in response to concerns about equitable grading and access during the pandemic. And what I did when I started at DeWitt, Donna and I worked together with our leadership team, and we said, what do we want grading to look like, feel like, and sound like, and be at DeWitt? What do we want our feedback structures to look like? And people, you know, without blinking said, we want it to be, we don't want it to be biased. We want it to be accurate. We want it to reflect knowledge and not behavior. We looked at structures and shifts in schools, and we said 21st century schools look different than 20th century schools, except for grading, which is an archaic structure that has been put in place to mirror this concept that we all should exist within a bell curve, that, you know, there are F's and there are A's, or there are 50s and there are 100s. And we've tried to shift the conversation to how much do you know and understand? How much can you demonstrate your knowledge and skill? Less about where you fall compared to other students. So this is a continuation of something we adopted last year, and our teachers didn't blink to say, like, this is a structure we want to continue. I would say we're 2 to 3 years from where I want or need to be with this in terms of our physical structures, in terms of report cards, right? In terms of our systems of Canvas and the way that Canvas and School Tool interact to create a report card, the way that we can set up linking assignments to standards in Canvas. Like, none of this is clean, right? I will openly admit that this is a massive work in progress, but I do feel that it is less about compliance, less about assimilation, and it's less about valuing kids that follow directions and turn things in on time and bring a pencil to class, but it's about what do you know and how can you demonstrate what you know and what you're able to do. And it is an attempt to mirror what we all experience in adult life, which is this: you can take your driver's test 1,000,000 times, you can take the LSAT 1,000,000 times, you can do a retake on most things, right? And you don't, I mean, I know I'm graded on every moment I exist, right? But like in your average job, you're not like everything you do, here's a 100-point grading scale that we're going to give you feedback on. You get feedback that is protective of your vulnerability. Like, I had a meeting with Lily today and she gave me feedback and I was like, great, I feel like I'm in a safe, vulnerable space, but you're not giving me an 88, right? And if she did sit down and said, here's your 88, I'll see you later, that would feel very different than what we've tried to do, which is really center feedback on the comments and on, you've achieved this standard, you're getting near this standard, you haven't even like shown up, so we can't know. One of the things I told my staff was like, not doing something is not the same as not knowing something, right? Like, a student not turning assignment in is not the same as them not knowing how to do it. It's just them not doing it, right? And so we've tried to change the conversation to, like Lauren was saying, like looking at policies and practices along with systems that, if you go back to this concept of mathematical accuracy, right? That's an example of curriculum work that was doing. Ooh, look at that, how I just snuck that in like secretly into the presentation. Hold on, I was actually trying to go back to something. Look at all these cool things. All right, anyway. Here we go. So a level 3 correlates with on grade level. Like you've got a kid here who's done 3 out of 5 assignments pretty solidly on grade level performance, right? So this is a 1 through 4 scale. Whereas you can see this student over here, could be the same student, could not be, has solid B, solid D, C, mid C, right? And then a 0 and like a not so great assignment they probably did like 3 minutes before class, right? So if you look at the mathematical accuracy of a 0 to 100 scale, it's not as accurate as a smaller window of numbers. And I could come and do like all these fun little activities with you with little samples, but that's actually what we did with our staff. We gave them sample experiences or sample grade books and asked them to dig into where the bias, where the mathematical inaccuracy was. And people got into it and really like dug in. And so that is, I hope, answers at least some modicum of your question.
Yeah, it's okay. It's probably for a longer discussion. So it makes a lot of sense. The whole thing makes a lot of sense to me. But one thing I'm still trying to figure out is if you're going 1 through 4, how is it that it doesn't end up just breaking down to ranking again? You know, it's like, how does it not just distill down to, oh my goodness, I'm only a 1 or I'm only a 2? So and like, how do you address the fact that it's still kind of grading?
Of course it's great.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? You're still kind of trying to fit it into somewhat of a ladder. Like, how is it? But it's okay, because I mean, maybe it's just a conversation for later, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll just add into that the 1 through 4, each of those levels ties to a description of where a student is in relationship to their progress with the standards. And we talk a lot with the students about what each of those levels is. And then also Carlin had been mentioned to the comments. We've actually worked with Lynn Vanderwert to expand the length of characters and the amount that teachers are able to provide on the report cards in terms of giving really specific feedback about ways that students are able to improve or grow, which has been really helpful to actually pinpointing, you know, what changes they would need to make to show growth and improvement.
And it is much more a larger conversation, but I would just say, like, when I used to give grades in my biology class, I'd be like, you have an 88, and it would be based on 5 unit tests, 6 labs, 7 quizzes, and like homework, right? So we're also addressing this idea of like, what are you valuing and what are you grading, right? So what is it that actually shows a kid's final experience with the knowledge or the skill? So when people dig in and dump homework and classwork and discussion and participation, and whether you had your, you know, pencil and your paper cut the right way or whatever, right? So there's a lot more in this. And I also want to say that we are 3 years away from where I want to be, meaning like what Lauren was saying was every kid actually should have, if we're talking about this in a real way, a series of standards and how they've addressed those standards, as opposed to a singular number like an 88 that has addressed 20 standards in a sequence of 20 weeks, if that makes sense.
So Carlin and Lauren and Donna and Dan, I have a question that's I think let's say it's in the same box. Proficiency, as I'm reading your lists of proficiency, my takeaway or my instinct says it's still based on a written performance, right? So what do you know? How do we know you know it? Well, we know because you write, right? Because you respond to homework in writing, you respond to a quiz in writing. Have you guys given any thought, or has that evolved beyond just writing to other methods of proving proficiency across the broad spectrum of students?
I'm so excited to talk. I can barely constrain myself. Yes, absolutely. So much of our assessment models have reached beyond just writing, right? So I want you to know, like Flipgrid, if you haven't experienced Flipgrid, I can send you some Flipgrids, right? They are kids talking in French or Spanish or in English. Like I watched a series of Flipgrids on kids reflecting on their learning during a biology unit. There are just audio strands that kids can use in Canvas. They can make even videos of themselves. They can, I've seen performances and pieces of art as representation. So one of our science teacher was having kids create a piece of art as the final entity of, and it was based on a mirroring of all the melanin colors in their class, right? Like, so they were learning about skin and the relationship between skin and race and identity. And that was their final project, was like a piece of art. So I want you to know that this obviously is very bland, like assignment 1, assignment 5, right? This is much more than what I can present here, but the expansion of assessment opportunities is really great, considering how limited we feel in other ways.
Yeah, and I would say that has grown even more so this year through, the pandemic and having students being located in, different places. Teachers are really experimenting with finding different ways to assess students and letting students experiment with what ways they're really comfortable expressing themselves. I was in a classroom today where students had the option to do a PowerPoint, make a video, do a Flipgrid, multiple options, all within the same lesson.
I jump in? I just want to say I'm just so thrilled that the two schools are collaborating. And I think that, as we've seen in a number of occasions, one of the silver linings is that of the pandemic is that it has forced innovation and really fostered collaboration, which I think is so key. And my experience as a teacher was that I experienced so much growth and such a energizing jolt when I had the opportunity to collaborate with other folks. So as a member of the board and a member of the curriculum committee, I'd really like to hear from you about, what can we do to enable you to do all the collaboration you possibly can. How can we help support that? Because I think it's vital. I also want to say I'm particularly thrilled with what you're doing at tackling this incredibly difficult subject of equitable, non-oppressive grading. It's something that I've thought about for 40 years. And as Carlin just mentioned, I've long been aware that any individual teacher's grading system is like this stew that consists of all these different things. And then somehow it's all boiled up into 88. And so also, as a member of the board and a member of the curriculum committee, I've been talking about, the need to tackle the grading system for 6 years now. And you guys are actually doing it. And I'm thrilled by it. And yes, I know, people are confused. They have questions about change. But I dare say that a lot of kids and a lot of parents, even with the old traditional, A, B, C, D, E, F system, or 0 to 100, they didn't really understand how, that 88 or that 61 got cooked up. And so, I mean, a big part of what you're doing, and it's ongoing, is communicating about what these levels, what they mean. And of course, these are accompanied by rubrics that describe exactly what are the components of for a particular standard. So just keep it up and let us know how we can help.
A question I have is if you all could speak to how the middle schools are coordinating with the high school, especially since some 8th graders carry high school credit and the high school still figuring out their grading system.
Great question. So any high school course is still on a 100-point scale. So when we're talking about a standards-based grading system, we have to work within the confines and systems that we have control over, right? So Lauren and I, Moira, I know this will not surprise you, but we talk almost daily, right? So what we've done is navigate that to the best of our ability. So really what that means is any earth science, algebra, or language in the 8th grade is still going to be correlated with the expectations for a high school transcript in our district, which is the 0 to 100 scale, with a 65 or above earning them that high school credit. And Nicole, thanks for your question about coordinating with the high school. We've done several things, which I can speak to here at a later date. We just had our first transition to the high school meeting with the team from the high school. And one of the big focus interventions for us right now is focusing on acquiring language credit at the middle school level, right? Language credit is accessible to all students in middle school, and unlike algebra and earth science, which students are quote unquote accelerated into, but language credit is critical, right? Because that one language credit can get you a 1-up and gives you the social and political capital as you enter the high school, right? So we've really talked about that mattering and valuing and trying to work on interventions that can help students earn that Spanish, French, or German credit. So we're working now in collaboration with the high school, hopefully to do some interventions for students who may need that extra support through the end of the year with some extended day work and some online tutoring. Lauren, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, and I would just add to that as well. We have also been collaborating as we're sort of looking at our equitable grading policies through the pandemic and making sure that the ways that we're supporting students are aligning through our high school credit courses and what's happening for the high school.
The second part to my question is, would both of you be able to speak to your communication plans with parents and families as I think about your 6th graders? So it being a huge transition for the students as well as parents, not having parent-teacher conference. I know having a first-time middle schooler having parent-teacher conference was something that was super important to me to hear about my daughter being somebody totally different at school than she is at home. And for parents that are now transitioning to kind of relying on their child to tell them what's going on. So just wondering how you all are checking in with families about all these different initiatives and programs that you all have going on, as well as the changes in grading and how parents are able to communicate with all of the teachers.
Yeah, so one of the things that I know that I'm doing, and I know Carlin is doing as well, we have weekly communications with families, and we try to include updates there about things that are happening, whether it's events or shifts such as grading, so that everyone is aware of those shifts. And then we also have continued to have family conferences available to families. We've moved those over to virtually. In the past, those were always in person. And those are a really great time when we can bring families together with the majority of a student's teacher. So it's harder at the middle school level to have everyone there, but that's been really helpful, and I think it's been very helpful. So with the shift for grading, I've seen those conferences be very effective if a family is isn't understanding the setup. We're able to really show them the grading system and show them Canvas, and those conferences have been really useful.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Professor? Mr. Ainsley's computer is doing a mandatory update right now for his company. So he's trying to call in. So you can imagine what the professor's on Rob right now in the middle of this. But,
Sure, I can imagine, and I'll give my board colleagues. I'll just say again, first of all, thank you all for your work. Thank you for your patience. As you know, I know this is the third board meeting that we've had you scheduled. Like some of my board colleagues, I am wildly excited by thinking about assessment differently. And Carlin, I really appreciate sort of getting away from measuring against other students as opposed to knowledge. And the idea of the bell curve really rung true with me. There's a lot of research on that as well. So I know that we have work to do, but it does help us push us in a different direction about promoting academic success in a much more authentic and genuine way. So I know there's a lot of challenges that we're facing as well. So thank you again for the work, and we'll keep making this happen. For other board members, are there any other questions, comments at this time?
Yeah, Sean, this is Eldred. I have a question, but we don't have to address it now. In fact, please, let's not address it now. I'm curious at the middle school level, how project-based learning has been incorporated into the grading systems. I know, thinking about our conversation at the board level, and to be honest, most of the serious conversations about this have been happening at the high school level. So I'm just curious, what has the thinking been about groups of kids working together and getting a group grade at the middle school level? And again, we don't have to address it now. We can take this up another time. We know how to find you.
Maybe that's also a question for us to address when we talk a little more about coming back to have another conversation about grading, including the synergy between the high school and the middle school levels as well. So
yeah, this is something I'm really passionate about. So I've said multiple times, I'm happy to come run like a session where we all interact with something in a way that feels like really meaningful, like little case studies of like, here's why and here's how, and then like taking that next step. So happy to help.
great. Well, if there's no other comments from our board members or questions, let's let our administrators at least try to get some rest before school within 12 hours. So thank you all very much for presenting, and we look forward to the next presentation and additional information. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Board colleagues, that was school district item 11.1. Next, we have on the agenda 2 policies that are connected. One is 11.2 about policy 1400, public comments and complaints to the BOE. That policy is also directly connected to policy 1230, which is public participation at board meetings. In fact, policy 1230, the second policy, makes mention of the other policy within it. So it gives some indication of how to proceed. So we thought we would, these are not policies that are up for a vote. The policy committee decided that it'd be best for us to have a board conversation. I realize that it is late, but let's have some sort of conversation, and then maybe we can give the policy committee some direction of how to move forward or what's best to have. So let me stop for a minute. Any quick reactions, things that you want to share? How do folks want to proceed?
Well, I have a question that might clarify some things. So in my comments, I said I find it untenable that people want to be anonymous when talking about important issues around kids. And Nicole brought up a very important exception. The exception was for untenured teachers who very well might feel, for rightly or wrongly, that their comments might be held against them. So Nicole, what I wanted to ask you is that the only exception that you can see being carved out? Because I think if we identify the points of vulnerability, it help us better craft whatever policy we come up with and whatever solutions we come up with. I mean, I thought about some solutions for people who have difficulty articulating, right, with speech issues and writing issues or whatever. I have some thoughts about that, but I want to ask you, is that the only exception you see being very valuable that we don't throw away?
Walter, do you mind repeating the question? Because I'm not sure I'm following.
Yeah, let me try and make it more simple this time. You suggested that untenured teachers may still need to respond anonymously because they're in a vulnerable position. What I'm asking you, is there any other group that you can see that vulnerability applying to other than untenured teachers?
So my comments earlier were less about the anonymous letter and more about staff in general fearing retaliation or retribution, whether we're talking about ICSD or I can speak personally working at Cornell and getting those surveys about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I intentionally don't respond to those surveys because people have ran their fingers through my hair. They've asked me if all my kids have the same dad. As one of the very few Black people that work in my specific division, I can be identified and I fear retaliation, retribution, and all of the things. So what I'm saying in terms of comments that were made this evening is I do not want to be presumptuous and assume that someone doesn't fear that they won't get they might want to go to a different school, for example. And they may fear if they say the wrong thing, they might not get that switch. They may be untenured. I think there are a host of things. Somebody might want to be a coach. They might want to lead a play. And I don't think that we can make the assumption that those fears don't exist. As folks that, as a board where we're just providing oversight to the district, and I'm personally not in the building every day, I have no idea what goes on in the building. And that's why we have the admin team that gives us updates. We also have our own personal relationships with teachers and aides and bus drivers. So we hear those anecdotes, but I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm negating someone else's truth or what their personal feelings are. Does that mean everything that someone says is factual? Some of that is just perception, but I think that we should be careful not to negate how other people feel, is all that I'm saying.
So let me step in real quick. Policy 1400 outlines when there is a specific public complaint, and it outlines a process, right? So if a parent or caregiver has a complaint against a teacher, then the expectation is that they'll work directly with the teacher. If they do not find that there is some satisfaction or that the issue's been resolved, then they work with the principal. If they don't feel that the situation's been resolved, then they work with the superintendent, and then they'll work with the board. There's an expectation in that process that would be, for lack of a better word, a known process, not an anonymous process. So I just want to be clear about that's the idea of policy 1400. Policy 1230, again, both policies were passed in 2013, and someone has already identified, I think it was Nicole, saying that we're in a different time period. And so partly the reason why we're raising these policies for reconsideration is acknowledging the decade that has passed, is that following the recommendation of the New York State School Board Association, there's a paragraph 2, which states that when there's a request for public comment, it would be made on a form that's provided for the district. And so when we're meeting in person, folks may remember you would sign up in advance, that it shall include the name of the speaker, the address of the speaker, the name of the organization represented, if any, and the topic to be addressed. And if it was a statement on behalf of any group or organization, that would also be identified as a spokesperson. That was done for a multitude of reasons, again, all of which we can and should reconsider. But that is what our current policy states, along with some other stipulations, right? How long should folks speak for? How long is the public comment period for, et cetera? I will continue to state that our school board meetings are not designed for dialogue or engagement. Oftentimes they're designed to take care of school board business, not to say that public comment is not school board business, but to have presentations, to pass the consent agenda, to get ready to adopt a budget, and items similar to that. part of the question that has been raised is similar to what Nicole said, is should people have the ability to speak to the board when they have particular concerns about identifying themselves, and that's legitimate. I also want to acknowledge what Pat said, is there are times in which people will say things anonymously with a particular tone and tenor that they may not say if they have to have their name attached to it. So part of it is how do we protect people who may want to speak to the board and let us know about their honest concerns. And other parts of it are how do we help build a community that is loving and caring if we're allowing people to treat our school board meetings similar to they would an online chat room or some other form or faction. And that's what we as a policy committee we're having a debate about, is how do we walk that fine line? Because of course we want to hear from folks, but we also want to be able to build community. And so that's where these two policies led us to. Please, Ann, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just a couple thoughts. One is I can see why someone might want to continue to do a comment anonymously. And so I'm actually open to that. And I think that there's other language in the policy that requires the language to be civil and polite. And so could that be the thing that would, it's not really the same as just an anonymous online forum because somebody's presenting that. And we have these other kind of rules about, how being civil. So that's one thing. And so I wonder if one could have a preference that one prefers that somebody does it not anonymously, but have the option if that's what somebody's really more comfortable with, since not all people are comfortable speaking in public. And yet they still would like the public to know what they're thinking.
Maura, I saw your hand, and then Pat.
You're muted, Moira.
Our policy or our process in the past with in-person meetings was never that the person whose comments were being shared had to be physically present. We have had other people read comments from others, but they identified who the person was that wrote the comments, that who they belonged to. And for public comment, my feeling right now is that should be the case. And that if people have concerns about repercussions, if their name is attached to certain comments, they can still send them to the board clerk, to us as individuals. And then there's Let's Talk, which I think is another subject that we need to address. Now, that doesn't address what some people were speaking to tonight, feeling like the broader community needs to have access to those comments. And I hear that as a concern, but I became uncomfortable as it became more and more prevalent for people to participate in these Zoom meetings by reading the comments of others, and those others are nameless. In part because when it's in public like that, when a name is attached, then the listeners can consider the source. And I think that has value, rather than everybody hearing something that is not attached to a source, and it's just there, and it becomes part of the public record, and it becomes part of the public consciousness. I have a problem with that.
Pat?
People will have to understand that I spent 17 years working on academic integrity issues at Cornell University, and I saw some pretty egregious twisting of the truth by a lot of people that you would not expect. And the problem with citing anonymous sources is, let's say yes, untenured teachers, maybe they didn't want to speak. How would we ever know that what is being said actually comes from an untenured teacher if they're anonymous? There's no accountability. And how does the person who is reading what that anonymous person said, how do they have any idea that that person is telling the truth? I think public discourse is a right, but it carries a responsibility. And that responsibility is accountability. And look what happened at the last meeting, and look what was starting to happen tonight. Three of tonight's comments were citing anonymous sources who were saying they were afraid to speak out because of fear of retribution or retaliation. Just that phrase is damaging and harmful to people who work very hard in this district, who for the past 10 years on the board and the past 10 years before that, when I was on PTA and PTA council, I saw good-hearted, well-intentioned administrators trying to work with teachers, protect teachers, and support teachers. And just in 2 meetings, we have seen some of the most divisive and insidious language being put forward to allegedly preserve freedom of speech. And I think that is a dangerous path. I think it is a slippery slope. I think it harms individuals in this district who work with and for teachers. I think it harms them unfairly. And I will say to anybody who is still listening at this point, that if in my 10 years on the board, I had ever seen any kind of retribution, intimidation, or anything that has been alleged multiple times by anonymous sources, I would not be on the board today. I would walk away because that would be wrong. And I am on the board to serve the public, the students, the teachers, everyone, and I wouldn't stand for it. And I do not think accepting anonymous comments does any of us any good.
Other board members who'd like to speak?
I just want to say, I think that makes a lot of sense what Moira and Pat are both saying. And I, listening to that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think maybe the solution, Moira, is in what you said, is that if somebody is uncomfortable speaking in public, that somebody can read for that person, but that person be named whose comment it is. And I also do agree with the fact that the implication that somehow there will be retribution, the district just wouldn't do that. So, I mean, I think that, that was surprising when people were saying that last couple meetings to me.
Chris Malcolm, were you going to speak, or am I calling on you wrongfully?
No, thank you. And actually, I want to thank Pat for what she shared. She said it well, and I won't try to reiterate what she said. But also, we need to ask, what is trying to be conveyed? Now, if there's a public comment and you want to share, there's an issue that needs to be addressed, and how are we going to address that? There's mechanisms in place. Or if you're saying, I want the public to see or hear what I'm saying and share it out there, we're saying, okay, there has to be a name and a face and a person attached to it, which I believe is a fair request. And like Pat said, we have to stand behind what we say. We're in the public, we're held accountable for what we say and share forward. And I don't believe that that's too much to ask for folks to say a comment. And, to say that we don't face retribution or any retaliation or any type of, angst. We know the emails we receive and some of the comments we receive from folks well-intentional. So I'm trying to, and we also have to uphold our policies where and when we catch this. We let this go a little bit too far, and we need to manage this accordingly.
So, Sean, here's a suggestion, and I don't know what we do with it, but it's just a thought. I would be willing to allow recordings of people's voices if those people identify themselves for the recording. So to Chris's point about people's faces, no, I don't need to see your face, right? This is really about having the individuals identify themselves. When I was running for the board, one of the reasons I ran is because I kept hearing this rumor that people were terrified that if they acted inappropriately, they'd be banished to Caroline or banished to Enfield. And I remember thinking at the time, that's one stop on the New York City subway station. Are the kids at Enfield and Caroline any less deserving of good teachers? I didn't understand that then. I don't understand it now, even though I know the different characteristics of the school now far more intimately. Teachers teach kids. Kids happen to be in multiple buildings throughout this district. But that's it. Here's my recommendation for a technological, a digital solution.
I feel compelled to say one thing. Look, the Ithaca City School District, like we talk about, and our leaders have said, is a racist, sexist, homophobic organization. We are steeped in that history. Similarly, we are also steeped that there are times when there is retribution or retaliation. We would not be wise to say that. As much as we may try to protect ourselves from that, it doesn't mean that it is beyond the realm of possibility. So I understand people's concerns that not everyone may want to speak. That's one part. With that being said, I still am uncomfortable with anonymous statements for a number of reasons. Let me address just two additional points. New York State education law at this point in time does not require school boards to release anonymous statements. So the idea about being released to the broader community, that's a school board choice. Even if it's stated as at a public meeting, the minutes can be struck from the minutes if the board so chooses. If it's with a name attached to it, the board does not have that leeway. I hope that part makes sense. The idea about freedom of speech has been debated regarding this for quite some time. We are not the only school district. In fact, the vast majority of school districts in the state do not allow anonymous statements. Folks can do their own research. It's a relatively common practice. Thus the reason why the New York State School Board Association gave us a policy that required people to state their name and state the topic that they're going to be talking about as well. And I am intrigued by the idea about what is trying to be conveyed. And it does make me think about how do we do a better job of building community and how we do a better job of reaching out and having additional ways of engagement with the various communities to be able to have conversations. That school board meetings are not the best venue oftentimes to engage in this work, or at least have they been constructed or as the work that we've been deemed to finish and complete during school board meetings. And so I just wanted to add those couple of items. Additional comments from school board members?
I think one thing that I would also add is that when anonymous comments are made specifically in representation of our staff, if we don't know who the person is, it makes it hard for us to follow up on the situation. So if we want to do due diligence and make sure that we're protecting our staff, if we don't know who it is, it makes it hard to follow up with whoever the supervisor, building leader, or director is. And I think that is counterproductive to the comment or the concern that's being brought up if we can't follow up. I'll also add, for me personally, the past 2 or 3 months, public comment period has been very emotionally draining to sit and listen to. So I will speak for myself and say that if I knew who was stating these comments, I would personally want to reach out and follow up with this person and to learn more about the situation and what I could do better or what the board could do better to support staff. But if we don't know where these comments are coming from, it makes it hard for us to make things better.
And I feel like I should be clear, the board is not saying that there cannot be anonymous statements. Folks can send us anonymous letters at any point in time to both the individual board members or as a whole, and they can send them to the board clerk, who would then send them to all board members. The question we're debating is about whether or not during public comment should anonymous letters be received, or should we be changing our policy? So I guess what I may recommend is that at the next policy committee meeting, we take a look at the policy just to review the language. As Ann said, there's other language there about obscene language. There's other things that we have not followed about conversations about particular employees that we've allowed to continue, that there's more than just, whether or not one has to state their name and state what issue they're talking about. And so I think it does warrant us looking at the policy again and seeing if there's other things that we may do differently or may recommend above and beyond this policy. I don't know what my fellow board members feel about that.
I think it is an appropriate use of the policy committee's time to review both policies. I'm looking at 12:30 right now. I think that would be a great discussion, and members of the public may attend and make public comment there. It should be their own opinion, though, and not the anonymous opinion of others that they're passing along. And that's what those committee meetings are for.
That's why we pay policy the big bucks.
That's right. And I agree that, and hopefully we'll get overtime.
And I will say to committee or community members that our working committees have the advantage historically of being far more interactive. So school board meetings are limited in terms of the amount of engagement. Folks should join any of our committees to have more dialogue. So what we'll do is put both policy 1400 and policy 1230 on the next policy agenda, just to have an additional conversation to look through them and see what we think. And then we'll update the board at the next voting meeting after that policy committee agenda. For any community members who are listening who have thoughts or ideas about this policy, please feel free to take a look and send them our way. We have not addressed some of the other questions about how may we be able to do some of the other work of community conversation and community communication, but we'll also be addressing that as well as soon as we can at this policy committee meeting, if that works for the board.
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. I'm going to move to item 11.4, which is policy 8240, district traffic and parking. This is a policy that has been up for a first reading, went back to the policy committee, and was moved to bring to the board for a second reading and adoption this evening. And so to begin this part of the agenda, this is an action item. I move policy 8240 for a second reading and adoption this evening.
Second.
Seconded by Moira.
Moira. Yeah.
Communicate or questions, comments. We're up for dialogue about this policy. Amanda, maybe for the record, is there anything that you'd like to say, given that you did a great deal of work on this policy?
Only that I hope that it, meets what we had strived to do, which was to make our grounds inclusive as well.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yes, thank you, Amanda, for the work you did on this. Yeah, very helpful.
And just to make sure it's part of the public record, we should know that Amanda has reached out to not just our transportation department, but all building leaders to have a conversation about how this would meet the needs of all of our buildings. If there's no other questions or comments from board members, Tricia, will you take the roll?
Yes, Sean. Rob Ainsley. Erin Croyle. Sean Eversley Bradwell.
Yes.
Eldred Harris,
Abstain.
Nicole Lefebvre,
Abstain.
Moira Lang,
Yeah.
Chris Malcolm,
Yes.
Anne Reichland,
Yes.
Pat Wazloo.
Yes.
Thank you. The policy passes. Next on the agenda is item 11.5, draft of the academic calendar. I presume I'm handing this to Dr. Brown or a member of your team.
Sure, and I will transition it over to Mr. Van Kuren and Ms. Talcott, who've been working closely with some other folks on this particular item.
Thanks, Dr. Brown. So folks, you may remember there have been a number of presentations by our wonderfully engaged students the past couple of years, framing the discussion around our academic calendar, around the question, who's included? And of course, by asking that, we're also looking at who's excluded in this calendar, right? So the students had collected a great deal of data and presented it to the board and to the greater community. Students from South Hill worked with students from LACS the past couple of years in order to work through this. And their recommendations were to add days off, particularly for some of the Jewish holidays, right, as a start. And we, the board engaged in conversation last year around this as well. And we also talked at length about some of the challenges associated with deviating from the BOCES calendar, right? So by including some, we then exclude some of our students who attend BOCES, right? And create a different type of separation. So it's become a bit of a wicked problem. We've certainly connected with BOCES and encouraged the young people to connect with the BOCES board as well, to see what changes might be ahead for the region that would really include and support all kiddos. So right now we have a draft calendar that's in board docs for folks to take a look at. And we also wanted to start the conversation with, yes, that is the draft calendar. We're really excited that New York State recognizes Juneteenth now, and it's observed on the 20th, right? Even though it falls on the 19th, which is a Sunday. And obviously we listed a number of non-Christian holidays throughout the calendar, but we wanted to put this forward to the board and also indicate that we're happy to mock up another draft where we pull from some of the other vacations or times off in order to try to make a more inclusive calendar as well. So we wanted to put this forward to you all and know that we're willing to, of course, engage further and make adjustments as possible. We also are, even just a couple of hours ago, we're emailing back and forth with our colleagues in the Ithaca Teachers Association because we communicate a great deal with them about this as well. I'll pause there, see if Bob wants to add anything in there. I'm seeing a no, and turn it over to the board.
Board members, questions, comments?
So could someone from the administration remind us and district listeners about state regulations around purely religious holidays? My recollection is we, as a public school, that we are prohibited from recognizing religiously based holidays and giving days off for them.
I'd be happy to talk. Oh, sorry, Bob, go ahead. You talk about the case law, go for it.
No, thank you. That is true, Pat. And we reviewed this last year, I think, and I don't believe the law has changed. And I think even Dr. Eversley Bradwell mentioned, the disparity in power structure, because how can we take off Christmas holiday, for example, and the court cases have construed it as a secular holiday because it is so widely and broadly quote unquote celebrated. So it does not make sense, but that's the way the law stands right now.
Well, I actually agree that Christmas is, as practiced, is a secular holiday, and the way it is celebrated in China, which is not a Christian country, is basically the way it is here, a celebration of capitalism. But it's winter break, it's winter recess.
I have one question. On October 11th, it's both Indigenous Peoples Day and also the staff district conference day. Is there a reason that you put those on that put a district conference day on that day?
Mistake. I'm so glad you caught that. That's actually a typo. So it's supposed to be October 22nd is the district conference day. So my apologies on that.
Okay.
All right, Anne.
Other questions from board members? Lily, the only question I would ask then is, I see that we have Juneteenth off for students, but we're expecting staff to be present.
That is a carryover from the BOCES calendar. So that's something that we're continuing to collaborate with ITA leadership around. So, one could certainly argue that, the state has recognized it, so we should recognize it universally.
In what way?
If I'm not mistaken, sorry, Maureen, I'll just finish. If I'm not mistaken, both Ithaca College and Cornell University have also recognized the day as well, which is a significant move in our local community.
In what way is it a carryover from the BOCES calendar? So what's BOCES doing with the
It's a student vacation day, but it is, that's how they've listed it.
A vacation day for
students alone.
Students alone.
So what are staff expect? What are the expectations for staff on June 20th?
And so, Pat, that's one of the things, that's just what I was saying to Dr. Eversley Bradwell. I was just saying that, we're working through that, whether that's going to continue to be a student-only day or if that's going to transition, right? So there's a certain number of ITA days that they have to work, so we have to coordinate with them.
So if that's the case, then maybe we should let the conversations continue with our union leadership and all of our bargaining units and see what comes back. If I understand correctly, you were trying to get something out in front of us to be a conversation piece so we can take a look at. So then I'd encourage all board members to take a look, ask our community to take a look as well, and give us feedback about how best to proceed. And we know that this will be back in front of us in a pretty short time. Any additional questions or comments? All right, if that is the case, then we're going to move. If there are any other discussion items. Great, I would ask folks to keep an eye on board communication and district communication about upcoming dates. We know that there are committee meetings being held next week, and I'm sure there's plenty happening before then as well. Recognizing that it's 9:54, if there's no objections, we'll call the meeting to a close for this evening and look forward to seeing my fellow board colleagues and other folks in the community, hopefully sometime soon. All right, good folks. Have a good evening.
Good night, all.